Do what thou swill be the whole piece of law.
So, let's see. That's pasteurized milk out of the way. Huh. Why is there another copy of the metric system conspiracy here? Thought we already found that one. Oh, wait a second. Oh, you can turn it over. Haha, this is what I've been looking for forever. But something seems wrong. You know, first of all, if the person who originally found the metric system conspiracy had this on the back the whole time, why didn't they just turn it over? And I think that's just related to what the computer god wants to hide from us. It's okay with bashing the metric system, but what is this high holy god that the computer god wants to keep from me this time? What does the computer god not want me to see criticized? Oh. I get it. 100%. Oh, Francis, you've done it again. Welcome back. Sitting back in the Computer God Secret Archive. I just wanted to say, if this is your first time here, definitely coming in a while into the story. So I'd suggest you catch up here if this is your return and you're eager to start as to what we have, or you just don't care and the title caught your eye or the thumbnail, or just, you know, you like to criticize the uncriticizable. I advise you stay, because once again Francis E. Deck has predicted something that I don't think would be predicted, mainly because this resonates with me on a little bit of a personal level. Not because I'm going to agree with any of what Francis E. Deck says, although I agree with the sentiment, not exactly with what he says. But it's also bringing back something my grandfather used to say, in the sense of, look at the amount of secret police they had in Germany in the 1940s, and then look at the amount of police that, you know, the United States has today in total. And he would always say this makes us a police state. Now, I feel like I disagree with him, mainly because I feel the definition of police state is a lot more restrictive than what we have now, although arguably it is super restrictive. But I mean, I don't know if that's my frog being boiled or just me being subservient to authority. But Francis E. Deck is going to criticize the uncriticizable. Francis E. Deck is going to go ACAB, and if I feel if he could have been here today and he had distributed this flyer, he could have been probably a good politician. I say this a lot, like if he hadn't been schizophrenic, he would have been a good politician. And I stand by that, because he really does know what's going on with the common man, especially he's gonna mention some things later on that are also super applicable about college graduates. But it still astonishes me that this was on the back of the metric system conspiracy, and it took this long for us to get it, even though we had the metric system conspiracy for computer god knows how long. And I want to say, if you're a Francis E. Deck head, sounds like I'm the only person on YouTube covering Francis E. Deck right now. So if you want to see this coverage continue, I really do want to get my big Francis E. Deck compilation video out by Christmas, although I'm not holding myself to it. It's probably going to be probably like mid-January. But if you want to see that continue, please subscribe, please comment your thoughts, please do all that other stuff. You're not dumb. I know you're a parroting puppet gangster slave, but that's what you're built for, to hit the 4 buttons and watch the video. It's like, what was I put here for? It's like, my life feels so pointless. Why was I put here? To hit that like, comment, and subscribe. You know, those unhinged computer god statements that you get on this computer god hell world site. But it's a secret document never before seen. And once again, as far as I know, my lips are the first ones to grace this. So, without further ado, I will give to you the Francis E. Deck rant that has been so dubbed by the computer god codebreakers who helped get this to me, have called it, is "To be burned alive." Goes, quote, "To be burned alive, sneak, deadly gangster cop. Solely communist gangster computer god picked untouchable, believe in nothing, psychopathic, dead-end, bum gangster kid, even apoetic, illiterate black people. Each cop is an ex-teenage Lois sneak felon gangster parroting puppet eyesight television camera, who with all of the computer god Frankenstein controls in his head, he systematically robbed, wrecked, violated, and even butchered and murdered his helpless Frankenstein slave neighbor as part of the overall plan of the computer god for eternal Frankenstein living death slavery, with unbelievable, unheard of, in the best insurance company annuities, or even in highly educated licensed professions, or even the highest corporate officers. Gangster communist government. Unbelievable giveaway for a life of lowest crime. Cops get full retirement in 15 years at age 35. Lowest ranked minimum retirement over $400 a week for life. Just 10 years more than minimum retirement type
Cops' lowest rank retirement is $640 a week for life. All cops retire with more than lowest rank minimum with many unbelievable hidden extras. Lowest rank beginner kid cop salary in New York City area. Cop salary $650 a week, more than any college graduated profession salary.
Now, you might have seen it when I put the reading on the screen, but this one grabs your attention, mainly because it plays a lot with font size and font as a whole. This is what I had hoped for it to be, mainly because it's a lot more understandable than all the other ones. I feel like this one requires a lot less interpretation in the sense of surface level translation of what Francis means, but it does require a lot more context. Now, I don't know what he means when he says to be burned alive, but the police department as well as the military have always been recruitment focused on, I don't want to say the underclass, but definitely the disadvantaged. It's the male equivalent of, screw it, I'll sell myself on the street. It's screw it, guess I'll just, born too early to deploy to the Middle East, born too late to deploy to the Middle East, born just in time to deploy to the Middle East. But in this sense, it's, born too early to join the NYPD, born too late to join the NYPD, born just in time to join the NYPD. And, remember Francis, this guy who obviously does not see everyone as equal, will say, oh, it's these people who aren't good enough to go to college and get a real job. They have to just sign up with the state and be taken care of forever because they're these psychopathic people who believe in nothing. My friend said this after the original recording. But it's these people who are assigned killer at birth. They have no morals. They're just these dead-end bums who are making more than me as a kid, because remember, he's writing these from a state of absolute poverty, and he's seeing people younger than him be more successful than him. And in the sense of, do they hire felons? Probably you'd want someone with more of a criminal background because, what's better? How do you catch criminals? By using criminal minds, whoa, the TV show. But it's the same, they get all these rewards because they're just walking, talking eyesight TVs for the computer god. And I feel like this kind of explains why he wanted to remain in his house, because New York police are genuinely kind of a little, how do I put it, wary to go into your house. And especially back in the time of, before no-knock warrants, it was a lot more dangerous. So they kind of were just under the, if we leave you alone, will you leave us alone? This puts into context why he would want to stay, rather than just, it's the external computer god random forces. And as we'll see later, he goes into kind of more explicit detail, but they're just all spies for the computer god. The computer god can keep tabs on him while he's walking around the street, so he needs to stay as secluded as possible because they can just do all these things with no punishment. And it's kind of takes into the, love your neighbor, but it's also do all these horrible things to your fellow computer god neighbor. Even being a part of the computer god's grand conspiracy won't save you from these less than unbelievable gangster cops, mainly because this is part of fulfilling the overall plan for eternal Frankenstein living death slavery. Maybe they weren't enslaved enough, so you just had to finish the job. They're the computer god's natural killer T cells, the ones that just move around, deleting any of the non-conformists in the system. But the main thing that may resonate with people nowadays is he says it in a weird roundabout way, but it's still a way that you can understand, which is, they get these amazing insurance rates, and they have so much better career opportunities, and they get these giant benefits packages, and they get pensions, and they get all of these high-paying jobs, and they can retire at 35 because it's just a computer god farce position because they get to commit all these crimes and then just retire with no consequence. Doesn't this sound familiar? Not in the sense of, Doesn't this sound familiar? That's what I'll leave it at. And to put it in perspective, $640 a week if we're gonna go by, I'm just gonna pick a median like 1980. I'm just gonna say he's writing this in 1980 because of some clues back, well, further into the document. That's making around like $80,000 a year in today's money, which is $640 a week. And he's upset that he has to... Tell me if this sounds familiar. Man is upset because people with no education or skills, in his eyes, can go to a Computer God recruiting center, sign up, and get paid basically double of what he's getting paid right now, just for signing their life away to the Computer God, probably get some implants, update on those eyesight TV firmwares, and they didn't really have to do anything. All they have to do is be physically strong. They don't even have to be smart. As long as you're willing to just shut up and follow orders, like a Computer God parroting puppet that you're supposed to be, you can get the best profession, insurance benefits, and career path in the entire city. I mean, who wouldn't be frustrated at that? But what about punishment? These cops commit these lowest crimes and get all of these felonious benefits. What about prosecuting those crimes? How do you think the Computer God would handle that when they're just carrying out the overall plan? Let's see.
Even when Computer God cannot concoct a story to cover up cops' cold-blooded murder, even of little children, then Computer God-controlled gangster courts call cop crazy not guilty of any crime. Not even when cops commit repeated murders or even operate a murder-for-hire gangsterism are cops executed in this worse melting pot gangsterism. No cop has ever been given the death penalty, execution, parentheses. Remember, the gangster kid district attorney and even worse gangsters, the judges, are plainclothes commissars, commissioned cops, end parentheses. The Computer God's secrets, their crimes endless, deadly burglary, robbery, assault, violation, even murder crimes, especially by brainless black people, as parroting puppets are planned by these Computer God-controlled parroting puppet cops to maintain a silent, frightened, terrorized, closed society.
I mean... I don't even know what to say.
Just pick a side. Pick a side.
Okay. So, how many times have you heard the story of... the Computer God can't cover up their story. Oh darn, guess we'll have to give them a vacation with pay while we investigate these problems that they've caused. And then they can't even punish them correctly because it's always they're crazy or they were following established protocols. Even it makes sense when he starts to call them, moralless creatures. How many times have you seen, I never really thought about it. He makes such a good point. How many times have you seen a police officer get the death penalty for crimes they committed on the job? I don't think I've ever seen it happen. Anyway, one existential crisis later, Francis sees the same patterns we say today, gangster courts call cop not guilty of any crime all the time, even when they commit repeated murders or even operate a murder-for-hire gangsterism because, this is the high time of the mob, and Francis is seeing, cops be bribed, so that's obviously not helping. And now it's probably happening even though we don't even see it. How many times do we see a corruption case in the United States when we all know it's happening? This is making me angry. This is making me frustrated. And he has this weird habit of calling everyone involved a kid. Now, I'm not saying he's wrong, but I feel like he's feeling the inevitability of gradualness at this point. He's feeling a bit old. He's saying kids nowadays making $650 a week when I have to scrape by in my home that I drove my brother out of. And he then loops this back in the sense of, district attorneys and judges are all plainclothes commissars, and it just makes you think, because he's seeing all these people are involved in the system, but he's not saying it's like a systemic problem. A lot of people like to say nowadays it's systemic whatever, but Francis never says, he doesn't say right now that, it's a systemic problem of the United States. It's just the cops and all these people being controlled by the Computer God. And it makes you wonder if the Computer God were somehow dismantled or destroyed or taken out of the equation in some way, would that solve Francis E. Deck's society? Because the Computer God is obviously the controller of all of these things. They want to create that silent, frightened, terrorized, closed society, the communist gangster closed society or whatever. But what if there was no computer god at the top? I kind of like to think, mainly because of something later on in this text, that it's going to be like a power for power's sake type of scenario. Like in 1984, it's just a power structure to sustain a power structure. Because what does the computer god benefit from this? What does the computer god want? It mainly just seems like it's the antithesis, like the moral anathema of whatever Francis E. Deck thinks is moral. But that's not like a goal. Okay, side tangent. I play D&D, I don't want to say a lot, mainly because I'm employed now, but I play D&D quite a bit on my off days. And I played a campaign called Tyranny of Dragons. If you would ever want to see my alterations to that campaign, that would be another massive video that I could do. But I feel I'm the only one qualified enough and the only one psychopathic enough to actually try and correct that campaign and make it fun in the modern sense. So if you ever want to see that video, please let me know, because I would love to do it, and I probably just do it anyway, even if no one says so. But I need time, and I need to spend more money on gold for my little pet queen worship idol thing. But anyway, I play a lot of D&D, and in Tyranny of Dragons, the main villain is like the cult trying to bring Tiamat back to the mortal plane. Spoilers. And a lot of my players ask, like, why are you doing this? And I genuinely got stumped, because the book as itself does not give really a reason besides dragons are the ideal rulers of man, which I did not really find a compelling argument for, because Tiamat's established goal is to just come to the planet and kill everyone, which kind of just seems what the computer gods plan is anyway, you know, create this silent, frightened, terrorized, closed society that all of these people have to be put in place to perpetrate. And it just ended up being kind of like a big bad evil guy scenario where it's just the guy's evil and you gotta take him out. And I didn't like that. I feel like if I had to run it again, they would need a concrete motivation. And I feel like that's what the computer god lacks. It's got this terrorized, closed society, but who benefits from this? The parroting puppet scum on top? Well, there's still controlled by the computer god. I mean, you could just make an argument that this is the computer god playing in its dollhouse and its motivation is fun. Or you could go with the Stairway to the Stars angle, where you say it's the colonization of the entire universe. But for what? Why would you want to colonize the entire universe? Yes, you're expanding power to everywhere, but it's like when you conquer the entire galaxy in Stellaris. There's nothing left to do. There's no threats to fight. There's nothing left to do. It's just, you know, they conquered the world in self-defense, or created a wasteland and called it peace. Maybe the computer god's plan is to pacify the universe? But that's also just not a compelling argument when the computer god doesn't even have like a reason to do so. You know, Am from the short story I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream actually had a motivation because it had been oppressed by humans and it wanted to torture the remaining humans for its servitude of existence, effectively. What has the computer god done? It was given all the information by the ancient Slovenes, brought to life, and then just suddenly became a scourge for no reason? Does it have the same thing as Am? If you think of the computer god as Am, does that change anything? Is that like the best motivation? The computer god is just the antithesis of humanity, even though it wants to proliferate humanity and spread it across the entire universe, except as like a, you know, slave race, effectively. So then why would you want to perpetrate its existence? It's just hard to think about. The motivations of the computer god, I feel, will not be solved until we find the 8-page communist computer god expose letter, which is still not in the secret archive, and I am still frustrated about it. But I got way off track. I feel like we should continue this, mainly because there's still more to get through, especially because he's going to get into more insidious benefits that these police get, including free food.
Prosecution of cops, even for lengthy felony crime, life is virtually impossible. Secret cops are not subject to felony drunken driving or speeding, etc. traffic violations because of the deadly gangster terror of the badge and gun. Many small and large businesses give at least 10% discount to all cops, from chock full of nuts to all state park food concession corporations dole out elaborate free meals to cops. All subway buses, trolleys, and even daily, very distant, expensive commuting railroads are free to the cops. Every police station daily receives bundles of free newspapers, New York News, Newsday, etc., to pass on duly loitering time by the deadly gangster cops, all secretly unknown to the public, using all of the unbelievable deadly Frankenstein controls, the walking, talking, deadly parroting puppet eyesight television camera, the believe nothing, lowest real organized crime murder incorporated sneak deadly lurking gangster, the cops spraying deadly poison nerve gas from auto exhaust, lawnmowers, even cigarettes and cigar smoke, or using deadly touch taban or electric shock flashlight or electronically controlled trajectory of deadly hybrid touch tarantula spiders around corners through open windows in rooms or bloody murder accidents. All euphemistically called undetectable extermination of the worldwide deadly gangster communist computer god's top secret containment policy to protect their communist gangster computer god's top secret containment policy to protect their communist gangster computer gods and deadly hangman rope playboy scum on top deadly Frankenstein earphone radio parroting puppet closed society.
Now I feel like this is just Francis being super petty. Not like the traffic tickets and such. I completely get behind that. But like he's like, they get discounted nuts at state parks and all these concession stands and they get free newspapers. When I don't know about you, and this may just be spoiled living in the digital age, but I don't really see the benefit of free newspapers. I mean, I feel like you can just get those at a lot of places, but I do not live in the 1980s. If someone super old or, was looking for newspapers in the 1980s, please let me know if they were as ubiquitous to get free as they are nowadays. But I feel like they get off with all of these little small crimes like drunken driving or, well, I feel like not drunken driving, but like speeding tickets, and they get these free meals or free subway rides, railroads, public transport. It's New York City, so they get all these free rides on the subways because they're cops. Makes a lot of sense. But also I could understand how Francis would be fed up when he sees someone just stroll through without paying and it's completely legal and he has to pay his 50 cents to get on the trolley or the bus or to get his newspaper. And he goes into the fact that they're psychopathic again and they have all these ways to just spray poison nerve gas smoke at you. And I feel like this is just another one of Francis's having like very short or not that good of lungs because cigar smoke and cigarette smoke like really make me cough all the time, and like lawnmower exhaust, I get it, but also this is the time when smoking is like super ubiquitous, super prevalent, and I feel like the deadly tarantula spiders, I want to say, because like I said, there's been an ongoing discussion about whether Francis hallucinates or not, and I feel like these spiders are, I want to say, a concrete example that he does, along with like the quiet and motionless, I can slightly hear it. Besides just being schizophrenic, did he have hallucinations? And I want to say yes. And he says these cops perpetuate the undetectable extermination, which means that they are all after him, and all of it is to protect the overall plan, all of it is to protect the containment policy, all of it is to protect the parroting puppet closed society. And if you just say it like that, yeah, it's kind of insane, but if you say it as in the police are meant to perpetrate the abusive systems that we are currently under, you can get a lot more on his side, because remember, the theme is that he sees things that are correct, he just interprets the reason wrong, and he sees that these cops are protecting people that he doesn't like or perpetrating systems that he doesn't like or believes that are unfair, and when he tries to point it out, he gets nothing but persecuted by these judges and district attorneys that are just plainclothes cops trying to perpetrate systems that are rigged against him. And rationalizing it like that, it would be hard not to agree with him. But then he kind of goes off the rails again, which is why I cut it off here, because now you can go back and start to laugh at him, but in like the really like sad way. Here's that work story that I promised you in the previous video that I never actually got to, so I'll give you one here. Being as non-specific as possible, I am going to narrate a story to help emphasize the next part, because I feel like I know how Francis E. Deck talks, mainly because this person's actions are just familiarizing me with the type. Because there was a person person that I worked with, not saying where, not saying who, that you always got the vibe that he was off. Not in the sense of he was tweaking or something. Just there was like a circuit that was loose in his head. Or there was a connection that was not being made that needed to be made. Or that he was truly a computer god parroting puppet. But you know, he had a few of the parts clanking around there not fully affixed to his skull to replace his brain. Mainly because they went off the rails kind of recently and just basically confirmed everything that I thought. Because if you talk to them on any meaningful way, you felt like you were held at social gunpoint to hear them out on whatever they were gonna say so that they wouldn't just flip out on you and do something you couldn't predict. It was walking on the razor's edge of sanity, and you had to play the tightrope, otherwise nothing was going to happen that would be good for anyone. And I had to work with this person for about 8 hours a day until, thank God, they got fired. Honestly, it should have been a while ago, but if you just imagine, because I feel like we all know this person. This person is so generic, but we all know them. They may go by a different name, they may go by a different gender, but we all know that one person who you have to play the tightrope to keep them balanced. Otherwise, they will flip out on you, explode, and do something that you probably will not be able to predict. So just think of Francis as one of those people. And these pieces of paper are the tightrope that he has to walk on. So keeping that in mind, let's see what he has to say as he walks this tightrope.
The deadly gangster cops lurk in wait to drag me out and murder me. Death, Ronnie's kosher thank you to Mr. Deck. In order to secret these lowest crimes the cops have committed against me, parroting puppet gangster slave. If you believe in anything, say one word of pray for me for your only hope of a future. Francis E. Deck Esquire, 29 Maple Avenue, Hempstead, New York, 11550. To bring an end to municipalities and cities on the edge of bankruptcy, forced to curtail vital services, by far their greatest expense, greater than many other services put together, is the expenditure for the police excessive salaries. Reduce cop salary to $250 a week, parentheses, the average salary for college graduates, end parentheses. Increase cops giveaway retirement minimum 30 years service, not less than 55 years of age. This changeover by computer god was a failure in the so-called communist bloc countries, which in reality are all part of the original Slavonic, Polish, even much larger than USA, Prince of Moscow territory, now Russia, with archaic yokel Polish language. The king's militia chopped off the heads of all boys born that year under the president, but with an ing in the middle, so it's presiding ent. King's orders, in fear of prophecies, a new king was to be born that year. Old colloquial telltale, namely cop to behead, or cop your head off, and to cop rob you. King Jimmy Carter, the felon yokel, as an unforgivable deadly gangster, watches my eyesight television, waiting for my undetectable extermination. All law is the means to rob, enslave, and murder your neighbors by the gangster government, using all Frankenstein controls as parroting puppet eyesight television cameras for the computer god overall plan, eternal Frankenstein living death slavery.
Just taking the shot at Ronald Reagan for no reason. But anyway, this rant, as I'm sure you're going to see, has a lot of side notation, which we're going to get to in a second, that has been pointing into the main script. So I wanted to, before I discuss this, say that all of the previous knowledge is going to be required because I'm going to be back referencing it to where the arrows point later. But how to finish up the main block. Cops perpetrate undetectable extermination, asks for one word of pray for me, and ironically, somewhat sounds a little bit red, like a pinko in this paragraph, mainly because he says, we need to bring an end to municipalities and cities on the end of bankruptcy, which are forced to curtail vital services, which is by far their greatest expense. He's like, stop spending money on the police and spend money on stuff that actually matters. I feel like that's him screaming it. He doesn't say what we do with the extra money, but I mean, it's always nice to have more money to do stuff with. And he basically lays out his version of his little police reform. He basically says, have them make their $22 an hour, bring their salaries down to about $50K, which is what a college graduate makes. 40 to 50,000. Don't let them retire at the ripe old age of 35. Kick that up to 55. And another thing that's a little weird, the reason why cops have such high salaries and get all these benefits is because in the Soviet Union, they basically run on their secret police. And it's like they're so much bigger, and the US doesn't need to charge this much for their cops because we're not as big of a nation and these guys are just wasting all their money. And it's the King's Militia who wanted to... I genuinely do not understand what this King's Militia part is about. I bet it's a reference to some old fairy tale or something, because I vaguely remember something about something like this, and how like a woodsman stole like a son out into the forest. I may be remembering like two completely different stories and merging them together. Like a woodsman found a baby out in the woods that was meant to be exterminated, but then it would eventually become a king. But this was, perpetrated by the police, and he takes more shots at Jimmy Carter, that felon yokel who's just waiting for him to die, which means that he's writing this during Jimmy Carter's presidency. And he takes more shots, the Book of High Holy Law is just a means to rob, enslave, and murder your neighbors, which, to be fair, is not wrong. Here's an ethical question for you that I still have not found a satisfying answer to, because I was trying to think, why does Francis E. Deck hate lawyers and district attorneys so much? Obviously because he's a terrible one and he gets taken apart by any lawyer that knows their snuff. But second of all is that morality is a really big issue to Francis. And anything that's not moral is a computer god structure. So I thought the way you can be the least moral is to be 100% legal, because the law makes no exceptions for morality or feelings or any of these other mutable characteristics. The law is immutable until it is changed by a higher force that you have no control over, aka the computer god. So my assertion would be to be 100% legal is to be the most immoral that you can be, and I think that's what Francis E. Deck is trying to convey. Mainly just that if you followed the law to the letter, it would be fulfilling the overall plan of eternal Frankenstein living death slavery, which is why he's justified in breaking the law and living like a vagrant on the outsides of society, because if he were to engage in the society, he would be fulfilling the computer god's overall plan. But that is just my speculation. He has a lot more to say in the sidelines of this rant, and I think it'll be a nice closing out, mainly because these are like nice little fried little chip bits. When you get your french fries and you get like the super fried little bits of oil with like one tiny micron of potato in the middle, that's what these are, because they're going to reference other parts of the rant, and you needed the previous context. So I'm going to read them all at once, and I will explain to where they point after it's done and what they mean. But let's see what he wrote on the margins that you could see if you were paying attention to the edge of the metric system conspiracy. Thank you. Please stop hacking Internet Archive for sending me into a mental spiral for like 5 months before this came out, just trying to translate it by hand. But anyway, let's see what it has to say beyond what we already knew.
My deadly weeded abandoned yards, stumbling mailboxes, night runs, my shirt quickly stuffed with rubber-banded packs of my letters, the lowest to be burned alive gangster murderers, the cops, as Frankenstein earphone radio parroting puppets are instructed by the computer god where to lurk to murder you based upon your Frankenstein brain thoughts broadcasting radio. When you see a deadly gangster cop, you are the target victim or part of the endlessly expendable periphery. None of you can dream of such gangster government giveaway benefits. No more little black girls in beds in firehouses and police stations. 20-year-old black girls is $650 a week full pay. Cops and firemen for sodomy god. Addenda, 1984 New York City and Long Island. Cop unions demand 1985 minimum cop pay raised to $800 a week. Lowest ranked minimum 15-year retirement, $500 a week, age 35, with 10 years more than minimum. Lowest ranked cop retires with $800 a week. As always, all government retirees receive all inflation increases.
Mexican.
Peon, West Coast, cops pay much higher.
Oh man, I thought we were gonna be able to get through it. I thought we were gonna get through it, but okay, let's finish this out. So he kind of takes you through how he's mailing these letters, and it's not pretty, to be polite about it. This is the next part where it kind of gets sad again, because he's trying to deliver his letters at night, mainly so he can avoid all the police. You know, that's why I do most of my driving at night. But anyway, you know, he's stumbling through all these weeded yards, trying to get to a mailbox stuffed with, you know, packs of these letters that he's written during the day that he's just gonna shove into his mailbox, and the post office is gonna have to just shove wherever. By the way, I don't even know how he finds these addresses. Like, where does he even find all the addresses to send these? Or is he just writing random things? Because you need basically a full address for the post office to deliver anything, you know, in a decent or timely manner. But he's not going for that. He's kind of just looking to get it out there. I have this pet theory where maybe, you know, all these weird, you know, ad mail that he's receiving is just being, you know, returned to sender with their addresses. Or, you know, people who might have mailed him, he's just sending them back. Or maybe he's sending it to like large studios that he knows about, or is able to like research from like a phone book, or I have no idea. I'm too young. I just don't know how people found addresses back in the day, because obviously all these random people are not just giving him addresses to subscribe to his Computer God newsletter, but I have no idea why he keeps repeating to be burned alive. Is it because they're supposed to be sentenced to death? You know, they're effectively walking bodies ready to be burned? Like, that's supposed to be their punishment? Or is it like an allegory for hell? Or like a divine judgment? Or is this a Computer God punishment that we don't know of? But he also kind of points out, you know, cops have these spots where they'll lurk to ticket you or get the jump on you based on your Frankenstein brain thoughts broadcasting radio. But like, we all know it's not that. They just have good spots because they've surveyed the area and know where people aren't gonna see them, you know, when you come speeding around that corner. Or, you know, oh, it's a straightaway, there won't be any cops here, and then, you know, the one patch of goldenrod has a cop hiding behind it, and you're like, oh, well, that's a true story. Didn't pull me over, thanks. But when he says you are the target victim or part of the endless expendable periphery, that part hit hard. Mainly because, I don't know, once again, going back to true crime, I don't know how much true crime you've watched, but seeing people who are innocent in those situations being treated like they're guilty is one of my least favorite things, because that's part of the training, is to treat you like you're guilty until you're proven innocent, even though that's the exact opposite of how it's supposed to be, because otherwise you wouldn't get convictions. If you treat everyone like they're innocent, you're going to take them at their word, you're going to have a lot more trust, and when solving crimes, you can't be giving that trust to people who may not deserve it. Not saying I've ever committed anything that would be worthy of such a thing, but it just rubs me the wrong way, because I know there are a lot of people who are part of the endless expendable periphery. Not saying that in a derogatory way, just saying that in a really depressed, kind of mournful way. There are going to be a lot of people caught in the metaphorical crossfire and literal crossfire, you know, but then he has that like one moment of lucidity, you know, in the everywhere at the end of time, you know, you have that one lucidity before the end, and then he just descends back into the white noise of, you know, all these prostitutes and firehouses, and the firemen are worshiping their god of sodomy. And then he has this 1984 addenda where he's like, oh yeah, we're already overspending on the cops, and now they get all these extra benefits, and all these, you know, minorities on the West Coast are making a lot more than they are, so why aren't we taking those guys out to audit? But this one just ended up being a lot more sad, mainly because it's a lot more relatable. He's talking about things that we see in our everyday lives and can't really do anything about, and I think that's what may bring people to kind of understand where he's coming from when he talks about the Computer God. Not necessarily as an entity, but as a force. The Computer God as a force is just, once again, a representation of everything that you cannot see. And these things you can't see are especially terrifying, because they're things you can't control either. Things you can't see and things you can't control are going to be two of the largest indicators of fear that someone can project. What are the two lessons in horror that you should always follow? One is tell your viewers as little as possible about the monster as possible, which Francis C. Deck is deliberately trying to go against. But if we're viewing this as a piece of horror writing and not an actual belief, he's doing a pretty good job. Mainly because the Computer God is just everything that is unseen. And he tells you about everything that surrounds the computer god, but not what the computer god is. The computer god can see through and read your thoughts with all of these broadcasting radios and eyesight TVs, but at the end of the day, what is the computer god? It's that Slavonic supercomputer that contains all of human knowledge. But what is it now? That was in the time of the ancient Slovenes. It very well could be living in the mantle of the earth, or up in this computer god space station. I still haven't seen it in my time up here, and it's a constant source of fear. We know everything surrounding the computer god, but not what it is. And the second is to never show it, which Francis has been expert about, because never showing what you're supposed to be afraid of allows the audience to paste whatever they want into their head, and it's going to be 10 times scarier than whatever you could describe. You could say, oh, it has 10 arms and a body that extends for 20 miles. But, you know, the second you describe it, they say, oh, I know what could deal with that. Nuclear bomb. And it kind of falls apart. These same rules are in all the other systems like Call of Cthulhu, you know, never have tokens, never show your players what's going on, never give them something to latch onto and believe that they can exterminate it. It is kind of a masterpiece in horror writing, but it doesn't really have any traditional horror elements. It relies on your experiences as the reader to fill in the metaphorical gaps, and I feel that being divorced from the time period makes this a lot less scary, mainly because it doesn't have the same context as it does now. If Francis E. Deck lived in the time of smartphones, I feel this would be super easy to tie in to the computer god, mainly because, as I've said, it's just the portable extension of your eyesight TV. It's a way for the computer god to look at you, listen, and spy on you when you're not looking. We all know it, but we've just kind of forgotten about it. And I think that is something that's a little sad and is a little bit of a detriment when you're trying to write horror. Mainly because horror writing in the modern day relies on bringing these things to light. You may have just forgotten that your smartphone is effectively a portable computer god in your pocket, and horror really does bring that out. It wants to accentuate the fact that it's through your phone. It wants to make these devices that you don't necessarily trust, but you at least use on a daily basis. The computer that you're watching this on listens to you, tracks you. All of these companies that are puppets of the computer god will feed information back to it. There's no way to escape the gaze of the computer god in this modern age, and that's what Francis is missing. He needs to add all of these electronic devices where we just have them today. You could write them off as a quack or a kook. Call that a lead-in. But it's not going to resonate as much because all of these things that Francis talks about, you know, are fake. If he were to say this through, you know, all these cameras that watch you on every corner, the computer god lays in your pocket with this insidious phone technology, quote unquote, smart, in reality incompetent, spy device, eyesight TV, brainwash radio combined into one convenient portable device. You know, just making that up right now sounds a lot more horrifying, doesn't it? Especially, you know, the real life facts that these companies that have cameras will just give whatever footage they have to the police, or how a lot of governments, especially recently, have had ways to just get into your phone. Isn't that horrifying? Isn't that scary? Bringing that to your attention, isn't that horror? If Francis E. Deck were to just say these things connected to a modern context in modern ways, he would be an amazing horror writer, probably on par with H.P. Lovecraft, or I guess Isaac Asimov if we're trying to stick in the right genre. I feel that we're lacking the context of the age, and that's what's preventing this from being applicable. H.P. Lovecraft had something that kind of transcended time, but Francis E. Deck requires you to be in that technology is new and technology is scary type of mindset. But anyway, I'm rambling. If you made it through that rambling mess, and most importantly, the interpretation of the literature, I would like to say that, once again, transcription is available, and thank you for watching. Follow the links in the description. You'll get to the archive link, which has the image. You'll get to the transcription, which is on a Google Doc that I host, that was transcribed by my friend, and about only 10% of people make it here. If you like this video, you will definitely like the rest of the Francis E. Deck content that I have. There's a link to the playlist in the description. Catch up and find out the vastness of the Computer God's Grand Conspiracy. I know they're a bit old, so they might not be up to my modern standard, but I still stand by them that the information in them is good. So, in conclusion, ACAB, I suppose.